This week is the last week of Chicago Bears voluntary OTAs, and it's a great opportunity for a few key players in particular to gain some ground.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. On the show today, we look at who's got the most ground to gain, the most opportunity available to them at Bears OTAs and then minicamps that get started next week. Some of the players that it's their time to shine, that their opportunity sits in front of them, and if they can improve, get better, and take grasp of what the coaching is directing them towards, this can be an opportunity for them to grow into bigger and better roles and bigger and better opportunities in 2023. A few guys on both sides of the roster that I think tend to skew younger guys with big chances in front of them, time for them to step up potentially into bigger roles. And one of them in particular that I think has a lot to gain here, maybe the most to gain. I think there's some, you can nitpick on who has most to gain, but Chase Claypool to me has a really big opportunity at OTAs and minicamp because he wasn't here for this last season. Like, yes, he was on the team halfway through the regular season, but he wasn't here in the organization at Hallis Hall in now June, but in May, in June, in July, it's training camp into August. Like, he wasn't here for these types of off-season practices to really slow down a little bit, master the offense, get on the same page with Justin Fields, learn the different receiver positions, learn your other receivers on your team and how they operate in this organization, learn your wide receivers coach, and not have that like immediate gotta produce pressure now. That when Chase Claypool got here at the trade deadline last season, or it might have been right before the trade deadline, they had a game on Sunday. And it was like, we got to do whatever we can to get Chase Claypool ready to play. And we saw early on more of a limited role in this offense because, of course, like he'd been here for 3, 4, 5, 6 days before he was trying to get on the field. And you can only teach a player so much of the playbook and so many different plays and so many different roles in such a short period of time. So it felt like, last season was very much trial by fire. Let's kind of trim off the edges a little bit and just get the bare minimum. What do we need to get Claypool on the field? What do we need for him to be able to function in this offense in some way, shape, or form for these last 8 games of the season? And I don't think that's enough of an excuse to fully justify his lack of production. You see players get traded midseason and be more productive and pick it up quicker than Claypool did. But now this is the opportunity to kind of reset, to kind of slow down and to say, you know what? Let's really make sure we understand the fundamentals on each play. We understand some of the reasoning behind each play instead of just like, hey, we need you to go out there, run this route at this depth, go, rather than sort of like understanding the bigger picture of like, okay, because your route is at this depth, then you're going to be here during Justin Fields' reads, and that's how the ball's either going to come to you or it's not. And the sort of the bigger questions of like, how can you make little adjustments off of that based on what coverage you're reading and the different nuances you can get in a play, plus just the chemistry of like, hey, here's how quickly Justin Fields gets rid of the ball. Here's how quickly he's going to get through to that read. How many times can you rep that and be on the same page as your quarterback? This is the opportunity for Claypool, almost like a brand new player who got a head start ahead of like, say, DJ Moore, who got here much, much later, but both are in their first OTAs with the Chicago Bears. And I think for Claypool in particular, like this is the time to take his crash course that he learned last year and now kind of go back to Luke Getsy offense 101 and really learn it the right way. Because along with this, right, I mean, Justin Fields has a lot to gain at this stage of OTAs. And I didn't want to just lead off with that because that's kind of the obvious one here. That of course, year 2 under Luke Getsy's system, Justin Fields might have the most to gain. He's the one who needs to improve, and he's the one who needs to take that next step and who needs to lead this offense to bigger and better things in 2023. And when you have DJ Moore out of the mix, and now a first offseason with Chase Claypool, and you have a revamped backfield and a couple of new starters, improvements on the offensive line, the system and stuff is all there. The supporting cast, the pieces are in place for Justin Fields to be able to use this time to develop and grow. There's sort of a mixed nod here. And we've talked on this podcast before to Mark Schofield in particular, our go-to quarterback expert about this. I think it's one of the most fascinating kind of conversations we can have about player development. When it comes to the quarterback, how much of the growth happens during the offseason and how much of the growth happens in season? Because, we talked about this with Mitch Trubisky a lot. It was Trubisky was an inexperienced college player who needed he needed reps, needed live reps, and happened to be able to get them then at the NFL level. He needed to feel the live bullets and just experience different situations to know how to respond to them. And he was a player who I think was really good at practice because it wasn't live reps. It wasn't bullets flying. Things were kind of a little bit slower, a little bit less pressure, and he could be a great practice quarterback. But then you got into the games and things were a little bit faster and a little bit more intense and a little bit more going on, a lot more to juggle in your brain, and it was difficult. And so is Fields a guy who's going to improve more in the offseason or a guy who's going to improve as the season goes on? I think because we're reworking his footwork quite a bit and trying to speed up that process, he's a guy who can improve a lot at this stage of the process. That the more reps he can do at OTAs against air with no defense or whatever, but just kind of getting his feet through his progression more quickly and really establishing a quicker release as a result of that. This is the time he needs those reps to do so. And it's not so much, it's harder to mess with your footwork and your release and stuff in season because you're so focused on really trying to, win the game and do whatever it takes to win as opposed to do whatever it takes to have the best possible form. It's more important to win than it is to have great form in the regular season. But in OTAs, he can really focus on, it doesn't matter, wherever this pass goes when I let go of it. I can still focus on my feet, my hands, my delivery, and everything. I don't have to worry about the result. I just can worry about the process at this stage of the game, and I think that's very good for Justin Fields' development. I think development is kind of the theme for a lot of these players that have the most to gain at OTAs and minicamp. In particular, I want to look at a couple of key contributors on defense that need to get better, but also have some great opportunity in front of them to take that next step in their individual careers. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back to you in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. So whether you're betting on a really exciting NBA Finals, a fun NHL Stanley Cup Finals as well, or you can bet ahead on this upcoming NFL season, Bears-Packers Week 1, where the Bears will finish in the win-loss record, and so much more about all the other sports as well, all in FanDuel's app that's safe, it's secure, it's super easy to use. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get your no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA and NFL. A couple of key young players on this Bears defense have a real opportunity right now to improve themselves as individual players, but then grow into bigger and more important roles on this defense. Let's start with Kyler Gordon, the cornerback, because he struggled last season, right? It wasn't awful, but it was not good, right? He had a lot of ups and downs, and he was thrown into the fire and had a lot on his plate. And we went pretty in-depth on Kyler Gordon as far as what he was asked to do last season and how that's a little bit different this season. And of course, we heard from Kyler Gordon himself and defensive coordinator Alan Williams. That would have been last Thursday's podcast, the June 1st podcast. Kyler Gordon learning to slow down and take advantage or take next step in Chicago Bears defense. If you want more specifics on sort of the intimate details of Kyle Fuller's development, go back and take a listen to that podcast from last Thursday. But in particular, as it stands right now, he is a guy who needs to improve quite a bit and has all the opportunity in front of him to do so, right? They're keeping him more confined, feels like the wrong word, but they're simplifying things for him in asking him to be pretty much just a slot-only player, to be that nickel cornerback almost exclusively. They've said, like, we're going to keep occasionally working him back in at the outside cornerback spot, just so he's not like completely out of touch with it. If there's an injury or something and he needs to move back to the outside, they don't want it to have been months since he's played that position. They're going to sprinkle him over there here and there just to sort of stay fresh and up to speed on it. But we're not going to see him do as much of the sort of like rotating back and forth between the two when it comes to the next regular season. And so this is the time for him to really lock down that slot position and be the best slot cornerback that he can be. It's not like he's facing a ton of stiff veteran competition. His backup is going to be Josh Blackwell, who was here last season and played pretty well, but he's an undrafted rookie free agent last year. Like, he's not really competing for Kyler Gordon's starting job. This is all Gordon with the opportunity to step up and be, a big time nickel cornerback in this defense, especially when you think about like the matchups he's going to get there, right? Slightly, generally speaking, slightly smaller, slightly faster wide receivers. These are not necessarily going to be guys, generally speaking, that are going to be physical with him or body him and be that, try and bully him physically, perhaps the way he saw a little bit more at outside cornerback, the number one type wide receivers on the outside that are a little bigger, a little stronger, a little more physical, that sort of like press, jostling back and forth down the field. There's not as much of that in the slot. It's more about finesse. It's more about being smart and reading the receiver and staying in his hip pocket across the field. It's perhaps a more difficult assignment, which again, we talked about that on Thursday, the difficulty of assignment there, why the nickel spot in particular is so important. But if it's something that he can focus on a little bit more and play into some of his skill set a little bit more of keeping his eyes, on the quarterback a little bit, you're going to face, I think, a little bit more of traditional zone responsibilities as the nickel cornerback compared to the outside cornerback, where even if you're in a zone like a cover 3, it functions similarly to man-to-man coverage. And so I think Kyler Gordon's zone instincts are a little bit more consistent, a little bit more reliable in that regard. And I think that's why there's this great opportunity in front of him to gain a lot as a full-time focused nickel cornerback. The other young guy that has a great opportunity in front of him, but less handed to him. But right now, I think there's a lot of room for Dominique Robinson to gain, the defensive end, the 5th-round pick from last year. Because, yes, the Bears went out and signed a couple of free agents on the defensive line, and right now we're sort of expecting DeMarcus Walker and Rasheem Green to play defensive end, although they both have played defensive tackle before, and they may end up doing quite a bit of rotating in there. And Robinson certainly finds himself behind Trevis Gibson, but I don't think any of those 4 guys are, locked in, pen to paper, in stone starting guys. Like, yeah, DeMarcus Walker's probably going to be your starter, and Trevis Gibson's probably going to be your other starter. And I mean, unless they go out and sign another veteran free agent in the next, few months here, we can project that it'll be Walker and Gibson. But if Dominique Robinson takes a big step forward at OTAs, really settles into the position a little bit, maybe adds a little bit more strength, adds more to his pass rushing repertoire, more consistent in his pad level, his hand placement, his technique in the running game, that's a wide open position for a young guy like that to accelerate and take a starting job or take a much bigger role in that defense. Like, let's not forget, Trevis Gibson was also a 5th-round pick, right? It's not like he's got a former 1st-round pick ahead of him that's just like, oh, there's no way Dominique Robinson's going to surpass that guy because that guy's just going to get all the opportunities. Gibson wasn't stellar last year. Like, I think the Bears could clearly upgrade from there, and it's a really weak position right now. And so that's a great opportunity for any of those 4 guys: Walker, Green, Robinson, Gibson, Jalen Holmes is under contract there, even some of the undrafted free agent. Like, if somebody can step up at this stage of the process, show that next level improvement, and kind of there's a lot of snaps and a lot of playing time, a bigger role that's up for grabs among those guys. Again, probably going to be Walker and Gibson, barring a signing, but why not Robinson? I mean, I think he has just as much of a right to it and an opportunity to it as anybody else. I don't think all of a sudden he's going to just flip this switch and become a great defensive end this year. I think he'll improve. I think he'll take steps forward. I think we'll see a little more production from him. But let's not forget that Dominique Robinson was playing wide receiver like 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. He only played defensive end in college for like 2 years, and now 1 year in the NFL. Like, he has not been playing this position very long. So to me, that's a good sign that he is still far away from peak Dominique Robinson. We haven't seen anything close to what his best football is going to be. And he had flashes here and there as a rookie. So I think that's encouraging. But also then what comes with that is patience, a need for patience. That, yeah, usually a guy in his 4th or 5th year playing a position is not all of a sudden going to be able to play that position at an NFL starting caliber way. But if he can improve and add to his game, even if he's not, the starter, can he be that third defensive end off the bench who comes in a pass rush situation and sneaks up and generates a handful of sacks, kind of surprisingly, without ever being the starter, but just being the situational pass rusher? Like, that opportunity is great right now for Dominique Robinson to grow in this Bears role. A couple other unconventional names that you might not think about as having a big opportunity in front of them, but they're getting an assist from the players that aren't at OTAs. Plus, I think there's a group of guys that I think we can all sort of classify together as also having a great opportunity in front of them. We'll look at who else has a lot to gain these last few weeks of the early summer Bears offseason program next on Locked On Bears. We know that Jalen Johnson hasn't been participating in these voluntary OTAs. He has said he will return for the mandatory portions of the offseason, so I don't think there's any reason to panic there at this point. We also know that Darnell Mooney has been injured, and so that's a better opportunity for Chase Claypool. We know that Eddie Jackson has also been injured, or I guess they are recovering from injuries from last season and are not being really pushed out there because what do they need to be pushed out there for in May and June? So, those have created some opportunities for different guys. I think Elijah Hicks, for example, is one that has a lot to gain here because he's the next up at free safety. He was a 7th-round pick last year who played a little bit when they had injuries, but no one's really expecting much from Elijah Hicks. And it's not as though he's going to use this time at OTAs to somehow unseat Eddie Jackson or be so good that the team feels like they can trade Eddie Jackson. No, but getting those reps with the starters, even at OTAs, is still really valuable for a young player like that in particular. And I mean, for Elijah Hicks, I didn't really highlight him or plan on including him for a bunch here because, I mean, his roster spot's pretty secure, right? It's Jackson and Briscoe, your starters, and it's probably Hicks and Williamson, the 2 7th-round picks, as your backup. There are other camp body type guys that are going to compete for them, and they could certainly lose. They might have something to lose here, but do they have a lot to gain? Hicks is not going to be able to gain more playing time by practicing well here. He's not be able to gain a bigger role necessarily, and he's not going to gain a job on the roster because he kind of already has a roster spot. So I see Hicks as someone that maybe has something to lose here, but not a lot to gain. But it is gaining from just the extra playing time. But another guy who's missing in action that is creating some playing time for an unexpected name on the offensive line. Nate Davis, the free agent from the Tennessee Titans, we know is not here for voluntary OTAs. We haven't really gotten a concrete explanation as to why. He just signed his contract, so it's not a contract thing. He's believed to be healthy. The Bears haven't said he's injured, so he's just chilling, hanging out without it. Regardless, with him out of lineup, the Bears gave Ja'Tyre Carter the starting right guard spot at OTAs. He's been filling in as that right guard number 1. And while it's a similar conversation with Hicks where Carter is not going to win the starting right guard job, right? He's just because he's working with the starters right now because Davis is gone. There's not really a path here where Carter plays so well that they have to start him at right guard and move the rest of the offensive line around. That doesn't seem realistic. But Ja'Tyre Carter is fighting for his spot on the 53-man roster. He was on the 53-man roster last season and has a good shot at making it this season. But, with Lucas Patrick moving to the bench and Deidre Iceland is on there on the interior as well, how many guards do they keep? I think Lucas Patrick is locked in as sort of a guy who can play backup center and backup guard. We'll think that Larry Borum is probably the backup offensive tackle right now. So then the next offensive lineman they keep, is it Carter? Is it Deidre Iceland? Is it Alex Leatherwood? Does Leatherwood, because he played some guard, is he competing with Carter? Carter getting these first team right guard reps is really important for him to show the team hey, I'm getting better, I'm improving, and I am a serviceable player that if there's an injury, you can plug me into the starting lineup and trust me. That's what he is trying to show right now, and that's what he has. That's the opportunity in front of him that he has to gain at this stage, is to say hey, you're trusting me in the starting lineup right now while our starter is not here. Do I hold my own there? Do I show you that I belong here, and am I too valuable for you to release as a 7th-round pick who's developing and getting better? We already saw them release last year Zachary Thomas, the 6th-round pick, or was he one of the 7th-round picks? One of the offensive linemen they drafted last year didn't even make it onto the practice squad through the end of training camp. You also have Doug Kramer from Illinois, the backup center, I guess the third string center in this conversation, who might be trying to make a play for a 53-man roster spot here too. So like this is Carter's chance to really stay above the rest on the bench and be that like go-to guard off the bench, or certainly somebody who's valuable enough to stay on the 53-man roster if Lucas Patrick might be the first go-to interior lineman off the bench. The other kind of group here that like the players have the most to gain here are really like all of the Bears' current draft picks, maybe minus Darnell Wright. Like Wright needs to develop and grow, but like Darnell Wright's got the right tackle job. I mean, he could lose. It's his to lose, but not really his to gain at this point. Like he can gain development and stuff. But to me, as far as like roles and opportunity go, all of your second, third, and fourth round picks have a lot to gain right now. You know, Jervon Dexter and Zach Pickens on the defensive line. No one's expecting them to step in and be a starter, but if they play well enough, they could start. You know, like they could bump Justin Jones to the bench. They could bump Andrew Billings to the bench. I don't think they will, but that opportunity is in front of them as they sort of, the defensive line coach was talking last week about how with Jervon Dexter, they're really kind of not starting from square one, but kind of breaking everything down and building him back up from his stance, from his feet all the way back up to his upper body, because it's such a different responsibility that they're asking him to do for the Chicago Bears, which would suggest that it's going to be a slow development and don't set expectations very high for his production in his first season. But the opportunity is there. The guys ahead of them on the depth chart are not so solidly locked in that there's no room for these rookies to create some space there. Tyreek Stevenson, great opportunity in front of him with Jalen Johnson not at voluntary OTAs. Tyreek Stevenson has been one of the highlights at OTAs, and one of the players playing the best, making the most plays and a name for himself there, while also competing with Kindle Vildor, who is easily unseatable by a good young cornerback there. Like that's an open competition that Stevenson can win and has a great opportunity in front of him based on where they are at OTAs right now. And then your 2 fourth-round picks, the wide receiver, Tyler Scott. He's competing for that number 4 wide receiver spot with Velus Jones, with Equanimeous St. Brown, with Dante Pettis, with Simba Webster. Like, he's starting behind all 4 of those guys because those 4 guys were all in the offense last year. And it's the opportunities in front of Scott to jump all of them. He's not going to jump all of them right now at OTAs, but starting now, then with mandatory minicamp, then with training camp, to slowly move up and up that wide receiver depth chart as high as 4 behind Moore, Claypool, and Mooney. And then the other 4th round pick, Roshan Johnson at running back. He's got a chance to start as a rookie ahead of Dante Foreman and Khalil Herbert. It's unlikely, but the opportunity is there. Like much like the defensive lineman, it's like there are better players ahead of him on the depth chart, but they're not locked in on the depth chart ahead of him. And if he plays better than them, then he can win that starting job. It's an open opportunity. And even if he's not winning the starting job, how he performs now through OTAs, minicamp, training camp, will shape how many carries he gets this season, how often he's active on game day, how many snaps he's getting on offense versus just special teams, and whether those snaps are carries, whether those snaps are pass protection, or whether those snaps are on the receiving end of the football from Justin Fields. But it really feels like there's a lot of opportunity in front of all of those young guys that pretty much are all like not handed starting jobs right now, but there's enough wiggle room ahead of them on the depth chart that these rookies in particular have the opportunity to gain a bigger and bigger role based on how they practice and how they perform right now at OTAs, at minicamp, and into training camp. We'd love to hear if there's any Bears you think that I missed as far as players with the most to gain right now. Let us know in the comments here on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. You can tweet us at Locked On Bears, or you can keep the conversation going in the Locked On Bears Facebook group. However you do it, just make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day, and I really appreciate all of our everydayers who tune in 5 days a week, because we're here with you throughout the off season. We're going to get you your daily Bears fix, and of course, your daily opportunity to bear down.